First thing I'd like to address is any confusion that may exist because, yes, this is a webinar on Office standards, more specifically looking at CAD standards. There are a lot of other types of Office standards that I don't even want to get close to. But in looking at the Carlson software and CAD standards, we have a number of tools for that. The subtitle here is Tools for Setting and Enforcing CAD Standards. And as much as I hate enforcing anything, I do realize that as CAD managers, people are in a position where they have to actually convince new hires and sometimes even long-term employees that they're going to change how they do things and do it the accepted way for your particular business. So we'll kind of walk through a couple little things here. Did you just lose my... okay. I'm going back and forth between being connected and not being connected, so I can always hear you, Ben, so if you lose my audio, let me know.
Yeah, we haven't lost you at all yet.
Okay. So we're going to step over here and see if we can advance our slides. So the first question is, do we even need to have standards, or can we just draw things the way we want to? And I guess the short answer is, if it's just you and your office, you can do whatever you want to. Small office, you can get away with that stuff. On the other hand, you may actually have clients who have specific requests and ways they want the drawings to appear. As your office grows, most companies want to have all the drawings going out, looking the same, being produced with the same appearance to it, so there's some recognition of the particular company. So the argument, I think, would be, yes, we want to have some kind of standards. How tightly or loosely they're enforced kind of depends, I think, on the size of your organization. And as organizations get large enough, we even find that some of those standards diverge between different disciplines or even different profit centers. So regional companies may do things one way in Los Angeles and do it a totally different way in their Denver office. A little walk down memory lane here. Back in the early days of CAD, the 80s, early 90s, everyone had CAD standards. Every office I ever talked to back then, they had CAD standards, and they were all completely different. Line weights, colors, totally different schemes everywhere you went, which kind of brings up the idea of, well, if everybody's standard is different, is it really standard? So that's one of the things that we battle. When I started out, one of the things we actually contemplated was, is there a CAD standard? Since we're new to this, let's figure out how to do it right. And the only standards I could find were some things put out by the American Institute of Architects. And they did this in cooperation with a number of branches of the military and other sources, and published this wonderful little book. And the nice thing about it is it didn't try to answer every question. It simply gave you a framework within which to build the layers and so forth that you needed to have to create a standardized drawing. Then in the 2000s, we saw the beginning of this program called Civil 3D. And one of the key factors in Civil 3D was a thing they called styles. And the original versions shipped with no styles, because everybody has their own standard, and so they'll just apply their standard to a style, and away they go, except that creating those styles was a very arduous task. And so one of the things that the folks at Autodesk did is they adopted a thing called the National CAD Standards and built that in as kind of a default, if you don't have anything else, let's go ahead and use these style for Civil 3D. Interestingly enough, those national CAD standards are pretty much what the AIA standards were in the early 90s. So everything comes back eventually, and we end up where we began. But that's kind of how we got to where the national CAD standards exist. And so today we have that as a potential default. If you don't have anything else, it's a nice place to start. But a lot of other companies have set all this stuff up. So what are we going to look at here? We're not going to do a PowerPoint all day. I hope no one's disappointed by that. We're going to look at the Settings Explorer in Carlson Software, the Settings File Manager, symbol library, because a lot of times the symbols that you're using, that's an Office standard. What you use for a benchmark versus a monument, what you use for an NGS monument versus other types of monumentation. Those symbols may vary, so you can control that. Layer library, where you can set up all the layers that you want used and kind of tell people if you need a layer, come get it from here. Function we call Draw to Standard. It's been around for a number of versions, but allows you to establish, if you want to draw a building line, well, you go in here and say draw a building line, and it puts it on the right layer with the right colors and so forth for your standard. Settings Server is a place where you can take a number of these settings and locate them so that everybody has the same settings all the time. So you can keep everybody on the same page with the same FLD file, the same annotation files, and those types of things. So we'll be looking at all these different areas of the software. I'm feeling a little bit crippled today because I only have one screen, so I can't hide this on another screen from you. Because when I go here, it's going to take us to next week's stuff. Also, I'm running on a different computer that doesn't have all the software that my other one has on it, and I've decided that's kind of a good thing as we look at this. And I'll point that out as we go through. It may make things look a little more familiar for some of you. So let's start with we're going to come in here and we're going to start with some settings. Go ahead and open this drawing here real quick. And I am running the latest Carlson 2023. This was released earlier this week. So it's just out the door. Keeping our fingers crossed that we don't have technical issues today. But we have done a fair amount of testing with this. So we're going to start by looking at the Settings Explorer. Settings Explorer has been around for quite a while. Interesting. I should have a few more things in my Settings Explorer. Okay, let's do one other thing here. Settings File Manager. Well, that has all my stuff in it. So if you'll bear with me here, I'm just going to reboot this guy. Don't need to save drawing one. And we'll restart it here real quick. I'll give you the standard side comment here. It was working perfectly fine an hour ago. So we'll get this brought up here. Open this drawing. And if this doesn't work, folks, we'll just go back to that one was working fine before, Settings Explorer. We'll just go back to 2022 and see if it's behaving better for us. Not sure why that one's not working. 2022. And no, we're not going to update it. We don't have time for updates. Which, by the way, is something that I guess I can share with you. If you are busy, if you are doing production, and it comes up looking for an update, you always have the option to tell it, nope, we'll update later. All right. So we're up and running here. Let's go ahead and go to Settings and Settings Explorer. This is what we should be getting. So the idea is based on the modules that you have, you'll see different information available here. This particular install I maintain with a copy of Carlson Point Cloud Basic on it, so that I can always do testing with Basic versus our Advanced Point Cloud module. And I have a copy of Survey just in the background to have something else to take that data out to from the Point Cloud. If you are also running the civil software, the GIS software, you would have settings listed here for those as well. So you'll notice that there are quite a few different settings. When you look at the polylines, the 2D polyline that you would create using the Carlson 2DP command, anything that can be set in there can be set here. This one actually is interesting. I don't recall seeing the one about use music, but I'll have to chase that one down in my spare time. But when you think about things, annotating closed pads, if you want that done automatically, auto-correcting for 90-degree corners, there's an option in here to tell it to set the entire line at the elevation of the first point rather than at 0. All of that can be set here. And then what you do is you save it out. It saves out as a CFG file. You'll notice there's one here that uses National CAD Standards layers. We provide a whole bunch of those types of things with the software. But once you've saved it out, you can now take that file, transfer it via your network or your Sneaker network, and share it with other folks in the office so they all have the same settings. So when they're doing work and you're doing work, if there are questions, it's easy to answer because you all have the same setup. One of my favorite toggles in here is this Show Layers Only, which drops us back to where it's only showing you the information that's talking about what layers are being utilized by a particular command. So this gives you a shorter list for your layers. And again, you can adjust any of these values here, save them out, and pass them along to others. So if you've gone through and you've changed a bunch of this stuff on your system, you've got everything running exactly the way you want it, you're in a position where you can actually go through and share that with the other folks in your office. And if you are in a situation like I am here, where you're only running a couple of modules, it's not quite as daunting a task. My regular computer has a lot of modules on it. I may just pause periodically here and see if there are any questions. Doesn't, well.
No, just helping Mr. Forney there.
One guy with audio?
Yep,
okay.
We're good now.
Okay. So yeah, the main idea here is the ability to save and load these, restoring default settings, of course. We always want to be able to generate reports so you can have hard copies of all of this, just in case your computer does bad things, which I guess I didn't explain why I'm choosing to use a different computer today. It's my other computer just wants to crash on a regular basis, which it did while we were getting going here. So, all right. So that's our settings server. I was going to say there's also this option where you can have it just show you the items that have been modified, which could be helpful if you're trying to figure out which things have been changed and which things haven't as you're going through and making updates. All right. So similar to the Settings Explorer, there's a Settings File Manager. Little different system here. This is looking at your settings folder, and by default that's going to be on your C drive under Carlson Projects Settings. You can remap that to another folder. Variety of reasons you might do that. Maybe your company has put a Carlson Settings folder out on your server and everyone points their settings to there. Again, so you're using all of the same settings. Very basic, straightforward way to keep everybody on the same page and implement some standards from that perspective. We're broken down here into annotation settings. The CSW is Carlson software. There's a number of DOT items in here. When we look at the FLD files, that's field to finish. We go through those. There's configuration settings. One of the things that we can do is we can actually set the current item. So for instance, if I want to make the Carlson FLD file current, I simply highlight it and hit set current, and it puts it in bold. If I later decide I wanted to actually use the Carlson National CAD standards, I can change it and make that the current one. So that's what this drawing is going to be using going forward. Word of caution, things like your configuration file, which comes from our Settings Explorer, you can't set that current, and it will tell you you can't set it current. It's not applicable to that file type. And there's some other file types that fall into that category. But you can see there's a variety of different things. Profile settings here as we go through it and you get into hydrology. Again, this one is showing us everything that's in settings, which isn't limited to just my modules. So you may find some things in here that you don't need to particularly get involved with as far as setting things current or keeping track of them. And then you can always compare any two of these. So, for instance, this is my current one here, the National CAD Standards. I can say I want to compare that, and let's see which one. The settings are identical between those two files, which is what I would hope they would be, because they're both National CAD Standards files. So you have the ability to check those and make sure everything's matching up properly as well. All right. Somebody asked about a format. Oh, now we're getting lots of questions. Can you load a DWT AutoCAD file to import settings from an AutoCAD format? You could. In a number of different places you can do that, but you can also just load a DWG from AutoCAD as well. You wouldn't necessarily need the DWT. They behave as just like drawing files. So, how can you change the setting file manager from the C drive to a network location? Well, that's a whole nother webinar. No, just kidding. We'll go there. So you would do that. There's a couple places you can do it, but in general, you're doing it through the project data folder setup, and it's going to talk about your settings folder and where it's located. And so you simply click the set button and browse out to the network drive where you have that located. Now, in this case, I'll point out that this would be talking in particular about this one drawing and where it's looking for settings. Excuse me. If you want to make those changes on a more permanent basis, you'd go into your Carlson Configure under Settings, go to your project data folders, and make the changes here. And that way, these are your defaults for creating new drawings, and that way it carry forward for you. All right. So another one we want to touch on here is our symbol library. There are a lot of symbols that we ship with this. I don't know if you've ever gone through and looked at all these. I mean, these are just points. And then we have points with wipeouts and trees and inlets and manholes, map symbols, equipment. And at the bottom, we actually get into National CAD Standards. And these are broken down into different areas. So you've got your boring logs, you've got cable TV, all these different symbols that are available. And with all these symbols that we include, we still manage to find an excuse to add more symbols every time we come out with a new version. There's always a few more. which leads to a couple of recommendations, because as many symbols as we put in here, we still don't have every symbol that folks out there need. People have custom symbols that they're using. So the recommendations are, number one, if you're going to have your own symbols in here, start by adding a category. Put it on the top level, right? So it's a top level category here. I can add categories to it if I need to have subcategories to store all of my stuff. The reason I recommend doing this is when we come out with a new version, we've added more stuff in here, we're not going to wipe out your stuff by overwriting a particular folder. You can import symbols. You'll notice that we're actually looking for DWG files. So if you have these point symbols that you've drawn up, all we're going to do is import that drawing. Nothing's all that easy. There's always little caveats to it. One is whatever view that drawing was last saved in is what you're going to see in the preview. So for instance, in here when we look at these borings, this symbol, the reason you're seeing that is that's the view. If you were to open that DWG file, that's what it looks like when you first open it. If this were cut off so you're only looking at the bottom half of this circle, that's what your preview would look like, and that's not very helpful. So you want to make sure that you've saved that drawing in a view that displays the information you want to see in the preview here. The other thing that we bump into a little bit is this whole idea of scaling and creation of these blocks. In a perfect world, every block would scale the same. So when you're inserting these using your field to finish, you'd have one scale factor and everything would come in and look perfect every time. Unfortunately, I don't live in a perfect world. So a couple of other rules I will suggest for folks. One, your insertion point should always be 0, 0, 0. That's a good starting point. Whether 0, 0, 0 is the center of a circle, the centroid of an octagon, the corner of a square, that's fine. Doesn't have to be the middle of the square. But when you look at your symbol, how you want it inserted, 0, 0, 0 should be that. One way to check that on any particular symbol that you're looking at is open the drawing file and simply type the word base at your command line, and that will give you that base coordinate. If it's not 0, 0, 0, you might check where your symbol is located. You can always move it to 0, 0, 0 and reset the base point. The other thing has to do with scaling. And the idea is, when I look at this circle, if 0, 0, 0 is right in the center of this, what I want to have happen is I want the radius or the distance from that base point out to the edge of my circle to be 1 unit. Not a foot, not a meter, not an inch, 1 unit, and I want my drawing to be unitless. That way it inherits the units of the drawing I insert it into, and it's going to scale pretty much the same way all of the Carlson stuff scales. I do have clients who have things at different sizes, different scales, and they have mastered the art of getting their scales set in field to finish in other places so everything works properly, and you can do that. Just trying to give you a little heads up, if you're creating new stuff, this allows you to just kind of go default. Again, once you get your symbols in here, you can save it. You can export the library, which means other people can then import it. They don't have to recreate it the same way you did. So it gives you an option to work with this information and get your symbols in here. So did I confuse everybody? Apparently. Let's see. Are the symbols able to be annotative for different scales? These symbols, Luis, correct me if I'm wrong, these are not annotative by themselves. When we place them through,
Correct.
we can do annotative stuff through field to finish, but not the symbols here would not be annotative. Can Carlson add a column in the layer manager which will show you the symbol for that layer? I'm going to start with, I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but we'll bring up the layer manager because we're going to talk about layers in a minute anyway. There is a description that you can add here, and I believe there are ways to add rows to this. Group filters. And I only say that because there are ways that we can add extra stuff in our layer library. But at a minimum, you could put something out here in the description field to identify what symbols associated with a particular layer. Teach me to try and read and talk at the same time. I'm not that good at it. Question about, can the symbol library be network-based or does it need to be imported? It can be network-based, and that's actually the last things, one of the later things we're going to talk about, which is the settings server, is how you do that. No. Question about when we update Carlson, does it overwrite the stuff? They take great pains to not overwrite any user-created data when we're doing updates. So they're pulling that stuff forward. The other thing to bear in mind is we'd actually be pulling the information forward. So when I installed 2023 on this computer that has 2022 on it, 2023 goes into its own folder. And so it has its own information that's separate, but there's a settings migration tool that says, okay, do you want to grab everything from 2022 and put it into 2023? And you can actually select which things come forward. And that way you get all that information coming forward.